Timmerie Millington has been a passionate advocate for life as long as she can remember. Even with a busy speaking and radio schedule, she finds time to devote to her creative love of dance. Don Johnson is an author, speaker, and major motion picture film producer. Both hold master's degrees in theology, and together they cover the week's hottest stories from a Catholic worldview. From the Southern California studios of Immaculate Heart Radio, you're listening to Trending with Don and Timmerie.
Happy Easter. You are listening to Trending. Dawn, it's so funny. This week has been a week of, and I keep reminding myself, we are the resurrection people. Rise, get up in the morning and move.
But what if you just went to bed, Timmerie? And it's like, come on, I can't. It was morning when I went to bed. You had a couple late nights over the Easter weekend.
I did, especially Saturday night, ringing in the Easter season. I was thinking of actually Steubenville alumni. I am not one, but I had a lot of friends who went there, and they would always want to stay at Steubenville for Easter because they have an all-night huge party for Jesus.
Really? Nice.
On campus. Yes.
And I am a Steubenville grad, although I only spent about 3 weeks on campus for my studies. So I did not get to experience Easter at Steubenville, but that sounds kind of fun.
I've never experienced it, but I was thinking of them as I was still up at almost 4 a.m. on Easter morning.
See, I think of that now, though, and I think, man, that would take me about a week or so to recover. In the old days, when I was young, sure, let's just stay up till 4 a.m. Now, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and then you had doing taxes late last night, the procrastination, just everything. It's been wonderful. Again, we are the resurrection people is what I told myself early this morning. Happy Easter, everyone.
Yes, happy Easter. How was your weekend in general, though?
It was wonderful. Spending time with family. And what really stood out, Don, as we were kind of sitting through here, for you, it has to be so special. You came into the church on the Easter Vigil 2 years ago now, correct?
Yeah, 2 years.
Wow, has time flown by?
In some respects, yes. I was like, it's Easter again, and in others, yes. I think, man, we've traveled a long road. It's been not necessarily always smooth road in the last couple of years, or 4 or 5 years, as I look back over the whole process. But no, it's still awesome. Yeah, it's still great.
But that's part of the Catholic life, even though we can say, hey, it can be challenging. That's part of our journey, and that's a journey through Lent that we just took as well.
Well, and then, we've talked about this before, Timmerie, but the Catholic faith, with its, I don't know if I want to say emphasis, but with its value on the journey and on the suffering that goes and on the redemptive and salvific effects of that, I just take so much solace in that. Something I feel like I was missing before I became Catholic, just the extreme value of the journey and the hardships that go with it and what they are doing for you. I just, it's wonderful. It's hard to say that. It's like, that hard couple of years has been great. Well, what? But in many ways it has.
What's funny about you saying that is interesting. This weekend, we had a long conversation in my house between my parents, my sister, and I. And we're talking about things that make us uncomfortable. And we're talking a little bit about my family has spent some time helping with a kind of a homeless camp and offering sleeping bags and different things. And I, said this to my mom and all my family at one point. I said, oh, man, maybe partially because I've been so focused in other areas working with the homeless. I worked with a lot of women in crisis pregnancy who have been homeless. But I said, man, I just feel so uncomfortable. It's not something that I in any way really like an area like working in.
Yeah.
And I said, I know that's bad. And I said, I also recognize we each have our gifts in certain areas. And my mom said, yeah, she said, it's probably good for you to be around. She said, because you have the opportunity to offer it up.
Yeah. Help me understand that. I'm still sort of trying to grasp that one, Timmerie, to be honest. In some ways I get it. But when somebody says to you, offer up your sufferings, sometimes I just want to say, keep your platitudes to yourself, please.
You mean you want to slap them kind of sometimes?
Yeah, and this, it does seem a little bit more valuable than things like, oh, God's in control or God's have a plan. I mean, there's a lot of things we throw at people when they're in the midst of suffering that I just think, I don't want to hear that.
Sounds like fluff sometimes.
Yeah, it's like you either you don't understand what I'm going through or you don't realize that your words are meaningless at this point.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's probably the most valuable one I've heard. If you're going to throw something out there, to offer it up, to find some sort of value in it. But I'll admit, I'm still trying to sort of grasp what that would... How do you understand that?
Well, I think that the words in themselves are irritating because it doesn't help you make a plan. When someone just says offer it up, sometimes I think that some people don't really know what they mean. When we say offer it up as Christians, we're saying take this suffering or this challenge, sorrow, whatever it is, and it's an opportunity to unite yourself to our Lord in his suffering and make it be something that can be effective instead of just sitting in it. Go, okay, this is an opportunity for me to grow and an opportunity for me to see I, in my body, everything that I am is made ultimately to be a gift, returning my body back to God. And so even in the deepest, darkest, most challenging moments, and you've been through this, going through a conversion in these last 5 years, you can pause in those moments of desolation, sorrow, discomfort, and recognize that cross that we just walked through this journey the last couple of days, that cross, I can actually participate in that. I can be in those wounds of Christ. And not only that, but I can offer up an intention. Whether it's maybe some people go, you know what? I want to lessen some of Christ's suffering. Not that I can do much, but can I myself carry some of that suffering that Christ went through in the garden when he took up those sins?
Yeah, it's a concept, one that was really foreign to me as a Protestant, that I would... take some of Christ's sufferings on me. No, Christ took mine. It's like the other way around. But I actually think it is more theologically astute to think of it as taking some of those sufferings. Christ didn't suffer so that you couldn't, that
so
sort of thing.
Wouldn't suffer, yeah.
Indeed, in many ways, he did so that you could do it victoriously, so that your sufferings could have value. He didn't say, all right, I'm going to do this, and now you get to have this very comfortable, pain-free life. No, nothing like that. It was, come, follow me, take my cross.
Yes.
Take my cross and carry it as well. And so, yeah, it's a radically different view, I think, than I have, but one that's much more, realistic.
It's
for one
purifying, though.
Yeah.
Because it makes us not just stew in this bitterness and hatred or discomfort, but we have to unite ourselves in a selfless way, even in the midst of something that's already kind of miserable, right?
Yeah, right. Well, and I think it's in many ways, you said clarifying. I think enlightening. There's a lot of frustration, I think, among American Christians, at least of the more evangelical variety, when they do face sufferings, because we have been taught a lot in America that God is about blessing you. God is about making things better for you, and that if you follow him, he will work things out and bless you and throw money at you and all the rest. All the health and wealth gospel. You don't need to be like full on health and wealth gospel to understand that a lot of the message we hear in America is that Jesus wants to do nice things for you.
So then the question comes of crisis, why did you let this happen to me?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's very frustrating when you hit something. Well, do I not have enough faith? Do I have some sin in my life? What exactly am I doing wrong here? And to realize, as Jesus told his disciples when they asked him about another group that was suffering, oh, what sin did they commit? Jesus said, no, hold on. It wasn't any sin of theirs, although you should stop sinning. But they have gone through this so that God may be glorified. And there's a lot of other stuff going on there that I think, as you go through suffering now as a Catholic, I say, okay, maybe I didn't do anything wrong. This is, yes, you want to clear up. Obviously, you want to clear up whatever you may be doing wrong.
Go to confession no matter what.
Yeah, obviously you want to do that. But to realize that Jesus is transforming you. That's the goal is to become holy and righteous and being able to love selflessly. And that almost all of the time is going to require some suffering. So it is, the Easter season, having that crucifix there. I know that I always enjoy coming to Mass early each week just to kneel and meditate on the crucifix there in church. Especially when it's been a hard week or a hard year or whatever it is, and just to have Jesus there and have that image it is uplifting. You know what else is uplifting? Conversion stories at Easter time. You had a couple of good ones.
Well, it was neat, and I don't know all of his story, but so on Easter Vigil, we actually drove out of town a little over an hour to go and welcome in some of the new Catholics in the church. And so exciting. I didn't really know this young man that well, but it was such a reminder of where our family is as Catholics. Our family's in the body of Christ. So my siblings, one of the students from their school, Notre Dame High School in Riverside, the quarterback of the football team actually had a total conversion to Catholicism, unsupported really by his family, and came into the church this Easter Vigil Saturday night. And it was incredible. You saw one of the school teachers who came. You saw my mom, who actually happened to meet him, Don. She goes to daily Mass at the school there. And usually the students don't really go, a couple of the faculty maybe. And then maybe on certain days, my siblings will join my mom as well. And she always would see this young man there over the last year or so. And she noticed that he wasn't receiving communion. And so finally, after a while, she's thinking, okay, either there's one big wampin' sin in there that this poor kid is struggling with, or something's going on. So she finally actually just approached him, and I don't know how she went about it, but she asked. And I think this is a great example of where we can see something and with love go and intercede.
Yeah.
And she kind of went and asked, and sure enough, she ends up finding out that this young man, his name is Niles, is actually in the process of coming into the church. Can't receive communion yet because he's not in communion totally with us. And so we went to the Easter Vigil. He received immersion baptism, which was awesome. I'd never seen that before.
Nice.
So he came into the church. We saw so many sacraments. We saw him go through baptism. We saw confirmation, and we saw him receive the Eucharist for the first time. And Don, there were probably over 100 people there receiving the sacraments that day.
Wow.
It was amazing just looking at their faces and the peace that they had. And I just kept leaning over to my siblings at certain periods throughout the night. Even when we were sitting at dinner after, I was like, they're walking saints right now.
Yeah.
They're saints. And it reminded me of this, Don, how sometimes we have a lot of struggle and hatred in our hearts for our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ in the church.
Oh, never. No.
It happens. But you know what it made me realize? That at one point they were just like this young man. They were just like all these other people, and that we should be longing for this reconciliation, this re-immersion in communion with the church, no matter what.
Yeah. That's so encouraging to think a high school boy, not because of a girlfriend, I assume, right? He's going on his own, not because the family's pushing him. All right, you got to go, to confirmation or whatever. You got to come into the church, but on his own.
On his own, yes.
Is really encouraging, especially of the younger generation. I mean, hey, I thought all teenagers were rebels and they're going off and doing their own thing. Here, this young man is coming into the church.
A very popular young man, from what I understand as well. I think it's pretty incredible to hear, and especially from someone so young, and to know that he can't even receive the Eucharist, and he is going to daily Mass.
Yeah.
Early in the morning before high school.
That is fantastic.
Yes.
And I'll admit, it helps a cynic like myself, because I noticed, and I was just reading, maybe this is why, but I was just reading this article this morning about those who convert for not good reasons. A lot of people, and maybe this has been your experience as well. It was with me in experiencing RCIA and some other elements of people who come into the church. They're not always doing it because they've fallen in love with Jesus and they want, hey, I entered because my wife wants to get married in the church, and so here we are, and we don't really understand what the faith is all about. And I'm always sort of interested, like, really, you're willing to switch religions, like enter into a church and go through all of these classes and all of these things for something that you're not really into, like you don't, your heart's not into it. You're just doing it out of obligation. the stats, and this is unfortunate. In fact, my own pastor, the stats on those who come into the church and are receiving communion a year later, like that are still in the church, are not good. It's a low percentage.
Really?
Yeah, it is a low percentage, unfortunately, and hopefully it's getting better. I mean, that's why I'm so encouraged. I'm glad we started with the story of the quarterback, because sometimes, and you experience this as well, sometimes you look at the, going through the Triduum, this wonderful Holy Weekend thing, and you realize, wow, this is this powerful, supernatural event that we get to experience here on Earth.
It's a rough event,
and all
too.
All of these people are sort of just going through the motions, or they're not participating at all, or they're coming into the church for less than good motives. And I mean, I don't want to get too down, but it's encouraging to me
to hear this.
On the other side, no, there is a lot of people that are sacrificing. And of course, that's I would never discount that.
But I think that it's in a moment to be an inspiration, like you're saying, Don, where, you do see a lot of people who, Easter Sunday is just another Sunday, and they go to Mass on Sunday morning, a 1 hour Mass, a little busier. Maybe they have to sit in the extra seats outside. But if you, and I want to challenge you, if you've never done this before, please, I don't care if you're putting it on your Google Calendar today to take the days off or whatever it is, to go to that Mass on Holy Thursday. To understand that part of the reason why Jesus' suffering was so impactful, why it had so much meaning, was because on Holy Thursday, Jesus knelt down, took off his garments so that he could kneel there and wash the feet of the apostles, to show, I have not come to be served, but to serve. To give my life is a gift to you. He's telling us this. And he institutes the Eucharist. That sacrifice on Friday, on Good Friday, would be nothing if Jesus hadn't washed the feet of the apostles and hadn't instituted the Eucharist.
The whole foot washing thing. I was one of those 2 years ago when I came into the church. I was one of the guys, that the priest washes their feet. And that is a struggle. Did you wash your feet really well beforehand? Yeah, of course you do. I mean, this is embarrassing, my ugly feet out there for everyone to see. And then, the father comes and washes it. But I realized at the time, and it's a continual struggle. Why wouldn't you want to get your feet? It's a pride thing, right? Why don't people want Jesus to come and serve them? And then you look at it, and I'm a typical guy, I guess, or maybe I'm not typical. Maybe I'm could be more proud than most. But that was a struggle for me. I don't like to go and have people serve me and have them wash my feet, and it was very humbling.
But Peter was uncomfortable
of course,
too.
Yeah, that's
Saint
exactly
Peter.
right. He said, oh, no, you could never wash my feet. Oh, but if I don't, you can have no part of me.
But that's part of the cleansing. It's almost a symbolism of baptism. I purify you. I cleanse you with the waters. I make you worthy. He makes them worthy to receive the Eucharist that night.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But to have God come down and wash your feet, why aren't you jumping at that? Like, why aren't you going to be served by God? And I don't know. I can't think of any other reason other than it's a pride thing. And of course,
and I think that gets at the heart of it.
Yeah, pride is the root of sin.
And it's the sin of all sins, but also we're talking about, well, why wouldn't you? God is offering you all of these mercies and graces. He's offering you the opportunity to be united to him. And think about how often we miss it. How often, we don't make that extra effort to pray in the morning and evening. Don't necessarily try to go to Mass here and there, maybe daily Mass when we have the opportunity if our schedule allows. Or when we miss Mass on Sundays, or we run away from the sacrament of confession. I was in line, I try to go to confession very regularly. And it was funny because I was in confession during Holy Week. And I heard this lady coming, it's been X so many years. And one lady, I don't even know what I've sinned. I don't know what I've done. And my heart was actually kind of breaking for them because I'm realizing they're missing some of the graces and that we can receive in reconciliation and self-betterment. And yes, God comes and will forgive you anything you ask him to forgive you. But if you're not aware, that's lacking an element of behavioral modification that we need in order to grow.
Oh, yeah. You have to realize your status in the world. as a creature, right? And again, this is the sin. I don't want to be dependent on someone else. I want to be the boss. I want to be in charge. I want to be that self-made person. To have someone else come alongside and give me that hand is humbling. Well, that's the whole point, right? That is the whole point. And the reason sin takes hold and we don't understand what's going on, we don't see our need to go to confession, is a total misapprehension of reality.
Yeah, and again, it gets back to that element of pride, not wanting to turn in. And it makes me think, again, as we were talking at the beginning of the show about suffering and offering things up, and it makes me think about how efficacious, how we can offer sin up for Christ's suffering, for an intention of another person. But it makes me think of Matthew chapter 11, verse 30. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. God isn't just asking us to go take this all by yourself. Right. My yoke, that means he is going to be beside us. It's on the two of us. We're carrying the burden together. You're not alone.
Absolutely. You're listening to Trending with Don and Timmerie. My name's Don Johnson. That's Timmerie Millington. You can find out more about us at trendingdt.com. You can hear us several times during the week on Immaculate Heart Radio and also on Spirit Catholic Radio and John Paul II Radio and lots of other places. An easy way to keep updated is just to go to iTunes and subscribe to the Trending podcast. So, on our last show, which aired Easter Sunday and also Good Friday and is currently available on the podcast, Timmerie, we talked about how the pagan myths, the religious beliefs that came before Jesus,
Ishtar, Buddhism, all these different pagan
all of
goddesses,
these different worldviews all around. Well, many of them had elements of truth that then were fulfilled in Jesus. So,
so some of them certainly did.
I guess not all of them. Yeah, we didn't go through the exhaustive list, and some obviously were satanic, right?
Yes, and some of them had similar parallels, and then they take a huge off-road.
Right.
But I think that some of what we're trying to cover and showing is that a lot of people struggle at Easter time or with Christianity because they say, well, Christianity, the suffering of Christ, just parallels this other mythological story I've heard before.
Yeah, it's just like all of these other myths. And so we were trying to make the point, and hopefully we were clear. We got an email I want to address, but we were trying to make the point that no. Catholicism is the fullness of truth. If you want the complete truth, the full story, Catholicism is it. Obviously, we should all become Catholics then. That's our point. But that's not to say that when you look at these pre-Christian myths, you have to say they were completely wrong. You don't have to say that because as a response to general revelation, they could have got something right.
There could be some goodness along their path.
Right. Well, we got an email, and I just wanted to take just a minute or two to address it because the listener here, she wrote in and said, you made it sound like it was okay to believe in Buddhism, but that Catholicism was a better choice. And the young lady was naively promoting Buddhism as a good thing. No, I wouldn't say either of those were accurate.
I don't think I ever promoted Buddhism, just to be clear. And I think that, however, I do talk about Buddhism and Hinduism a lot on the show because it's something I sincerely recognize. A lot of people, especially the millennial generation, they're really struggling to find this spirituality. They didn't grow up with any type of religion, organized, clear Christianity. So as they're searching, they end up adopting elements of Buddhism and Hinduism in the self-betterment or in a lot of these meditative practices that empty the mind void of God. And so I think it's important, we've talked about this, to understand, there are elements in Buddhism and Hinduism where they're seeking this self-betterment, but it's not enough because it's missing that element of why are you seeking that self-betterment? For yourself?
Right.
For who you are?
Yeah. Well, what you do as a missiologist, as someone who is trying to evangelize, and this is actually my background. My undergrad is in how to do missions, how to cross-cultural communication, how do we reach someone from a different worldview. Well, what you do, and we have learned this over centuries of practice, is you grasp onto what they have true, what they have found that is accurate, and build on that. You don't just come in and say your entire culture, all of your beliefs, everything you think you found that's helpful to you, it's all garbage.
Yeah.
Toss it aside.
My dad was talking about that this weekend. He goes, you don't want to just come on air and be like, a huge slap in the face.
Well, for one thing, that's not true.
And
right?
that's not loving. That's not accommodating where people are at. God's divine pedagogy we read throughout the Old Testament.
It's completely unhelpful, and it actually does a disservice. This is the thing. It does a disservice to Catholicism to go into a culture and do that. Well, we are in a mission field right now in America, just like you said, Timmerie. These people, in many ways, they are like the pre-Christian pagans.
Seeking virtue in some way.
They're seeking truth. They're seeking virtue. They're trying to get through life. We grasp onto the little truths that they have found, and you build on them, correct them if you need to, and they do need a lot of correcting, and lead them to Catholicism. Now, she made the point, this listener, she said, I suggest that you do a little research and do a little history because this isn't in line with Catholicism. Actually, it very much is in line with the official teaching of the Church. Gaudium et Spes, Vatican II, the magisterial documents on the Church in the modern world make very clear.
On the new evangelization.
They make very clear that we can take the truths from other religions, and there are some out there, and build on them.
Well, and we're all called to be missionaries, and the church and all of its documents on the new evangelization, on evangelizing, we are each called to be evangelizers, but it's not by how much we can smack people over the head. It's how we can live an example, how we can sometimes let people see, wow, this person's actually seeking virtue. And me and my Hinduism and Buddhism and my self-betterment, I too am seeking truth and virtue, but there's something I am missing.
And here's the other thing. It does a disservice to tell people that there are no parallels when there clearly are. This is the thing. It makes you look dishonest or naive yourself.
Well, you're ignoring human nature and this natural seeking for the divine and God, which may clearly in some people it's a little disordered and a little confused and they're not seeing quite where it is.
Well, I mean, we even looked at, you look at stories like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Lord of the Rings. These are all in many ways the same story. Yes. And you can use that, even Harry Potter. I know, I said it. I said the two words. It's very dangerous to say, but even Harry Potter, you take what is good, what is true, the self-sacrificing for the good of another, for example, and you build on that, and you say, well, here's where it's right, here's where it's wrong. Catholicism is the fullness of all of these stories. Okay, that's the point. We don't need to belabor it. I just wanted to clarify that, no, we're not saying it's okay to stay as a Buddhist. That's not the case. No, everybody should become Catholic. Of course you should. That's the fullness of truth. That's God's church. But in evangelizing others, it's also just fine to say, well, this part you're right about.
You could see some similarities. And in that you're working, again, you're holding their hand and you're walking through saying, let's seek the truth. But what we are not doing is we are not saying here, Buddhism is fine. Sitting here worshiping a quote-unquote lower G God that is not the God, that's actually going to create harm and damage in your soul. And it can open pathways to different types of spirituality and demonology that can be very, very harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you would like more on my speaking about how Christianity and Catholicism in particular, the fullness of the Christian faith, compares with other religions, go to donjohnsonministries.org. Just type in whatever you want to talk about. We want to talk about Islam. There's lots of resources there. You want to talk about Buddhism. I've been talking about this stuff for years. No one has ever, this may be one of our first emails, no one has ever accused me of being soft.
I think it was me who got the accusation, Don.
I was the guy who, when Islam, for example, do we all worship the same God? No, we do not worship the same God.
You know how often I get that? I had someone not too long ago. Well, Islam or Buddhism, it's all the same thing, so it doesn't matter. They don't have to convert, right? And my heart hurt for this person, someone who loves our Lord and knows her faith. And I just looked at her, I said, yes, it does matter, because we can get to the point where we start justifying things or follow a pattern, a mindset that is not truth. And when we are not following truth, everything in our life becomes disordered.
Absolutely. You're listening to Trending with Don and Timmerie. Big movie weekend. Are you a fan of the Fast and Furious movies?
It's been a long time since I've seen one.
Now, I admit, I did not start. I think I've seen the first one. I don't think I saw either. What are they? They're on like 27 now or something.
There's a lot of them.
There's a million of them. But I think it was 6, 7, out of one of those ones. My wife and I were looking for something. All right, here's, let's Redbox this or whatever it was.
I think I only ever saw one with Vin Diesel.
Well, he's in most of them.
Is he in all of them?
No, not all of them,
Okay.
I don't think. There's a couple there, like 2 or 3, where they didn't have all the stars. And I think we can just discard those in some ways.
So which ones did you and your wife see?
I think it was like 5 or 6.
Okay.
Surprisingly good movie. Yeah. We were both shocked. We're like, all right, we've got nothing. Oh, we'll just, watch some car chases or whatever. No, surprisingly good movie. And I think the last few, I don't know that I've seen 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever this last one is. Anyway, it opened up. It did better than the last Star Wars worldwide. I mean, in the...
No way.
Oh, yeah, 600-700 million worldwide. This last... crazy numbers for the latest Fast and Furious movie. Well, I bring it up because David French over at National Review, and actually a couple of writers at National Review, had a little think piece on why the Fast and Furious movies are so popular and why they're actually good. And I'll just read a little bit of this to you. He says, when I see the difference between men who struggle and men who thrive, the men who thrive are the ones, not to get too technical about it, he says, but the men who thrive are the ones who tend to do something cool while maintaining deep connections with others. All right? So your work is something that you find meaningful and you enjoy, at least to some extent. Your work has to be something you're not just completely dreading. Mm-hmm. And 2, you have to have deep connections with others. You have to have family, friends that are there for you. Those 2 things. He says, just in my life, those who thrive, men who thrive, have those 2 things. And he's like, that just is biblical. That's just Ecclesiastes, right? Solomon urges men to find satisfaction in their toil, and he urges them to the selfless love of the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. Serve God, serve others. Right?
There's something meaningful about hard work, and not just hard work in and of itself, but as it's connected and for other people.
Yeah, you got to find meaning in it. And as a man, I can absolutely assure you that I find this to be 100% correct. I can't be out there doing something that's completely meaningless. I would prefer to, I've dug graves for a living. I've hauled manure. I've done all sorts of things. But you know what? I could see tangible results. I was helping others, whatever.
You're
you can
providing for your family.
I would much rather do that than other meaningless things that, I'm not going to suggest any. You can think of them, right? There's out there. You're just doing it to make money.
But also, there's nothing wrong with doing something as long as it's something good, not bad, right?
Oh, yeah.
To provide for your family.
But I know there's a lot of desperation among men who find themselves stuck in jobs that they hate and that they do not actually see any sort of meaning in. Anyway, all that to say, David French thinks that the Fast and Furious movies are so popular because they offer a very clear picture of those 2 things. And I'll read a little bit more here. He says, in a time of lost fathers and fractured families, that's what people aspire to. They want meaningful work and they want close family. And the Fast and Furious offers exactly that. You've got this group of people in the Fast and Furious movies who come from very tough backgrounds a lot of times. Mm-hmm. They actually talk about their family stories quite a bit. People like Vin Diesel and The Rock and these other actors. They talk about their families and how pained they were when they were broken. But the main theme of the movie is that this group they have now is their family. And they'll do anything.
They have
for
a
their
brotherhood
family.
here.
And a sisterhood. Yeah, there's women involved. It's like this tight-knit group of people is the story. And of course they're off doing very cool things, right?
Well, I think that's a testament to maybe part of the reason why people love the story. Not only do you see cool cars, but you see this element of a community, that we live in a time that so many people are hungry for this community. I mean, we talk about deep loneliness and depression and mental illness that people are experiencing today. We look at contraception, abortion, the impact, and how these things are removing us from interaction with other people, and how at the end of the day we are made to be in community. And even when it's challenging to be around those people, I mean, truly challenging, that's part of what makes love enter into the relationship, when we're giving of ourselves, even when they're not pleasant people to be around.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, David French, in this article, he talks about how he worked in a ministry that reached out to at-risk kids. Now, I did the very same thing. I spent several years doing inner city ministry, and you're probably all aware of the stories of gangs in the inner city. But have you ever thought about why those gangs are there and why they are so tight? It's because when those families are so fractured, those kids need to belong to something.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely true. I mean, we would put 500, 700 kids through summer camp, for example, in a summer. You know how many of those kids came from a home that had a mother and a father? Less than 5. Mm-hmm. Less than 5 out of hundreds and hundreds. Kids. And you wonder, well, why do gangs get that foothold in those inner city communities? It's because of the lack of family stability. Those kids need something. And so I thought that was a really interesting point to make about these Fast and Furious movies. And actually, if you look at the history of it, the first one was sort of, Point Break in race cars. Are you familiar with Point Break at all? The classic Patrick Swayze, no. Keanu Reeves. Oh, gosh. Yeah, the FBI agent or whatever he was goes and becomes part of this illegal gang as an undercover, and then becomes, creates a bond with them. Well, that's what the Fast and Furious movies are. There's this bond between the agent and these criminals, right? And then this goes on and on through. Well, movies 2 and 3 sort of abandoned that, and then the stars came back and they made a conscious effort to build a Fast and Furious universe around the whole notion of family. Like the screenwriters actually took this, all right, if we're going to do this, if we're going to come back and make whatever it was, number 4, we're going to make it all about family. And since then, these things, like I said, better than Star Wars this weekend. This huge franchise based around love,
well, and
ultimately.
It shows that when screenwriters are seen at the heart of what we're seeing in society right now is a breakdown of the family. Let's provide stories that point to community and family, because this brings us peace. It gives us an emotional satisfaction, but don't let it just be that. Go out, seek to build up that community within your own environment in your daily life.
It reminded me of another story. I think you sent this over to me this week, Timmerie, from the Washington Post. Apparently, for 79 years, Harvard has been studying the keys to happiness.
Yes.
Okay. I think they're about to lose their funding or something. I'm not exactly sure why this came up after 80 years in the Washington Post. Maybe that was it. They want to keep this thing going. But what was so interesting about this is after 80 years, they have summed up what it takes to be happy. Okay. Yes. And it's not money and it's not power.
Nope.
None of those things. Here's what you need. Love.
Here's what you need. You need deep connections to other people, long-term connections with other people. And a lot of the time, you know what? They studied over 724 people year after year, rechecking in with them. And again, at the heart of it were these deep long-term connections. And the happiest people usually tended to be people who had long-term marriages.
Yeah, it's always the key, sociologically, yes. If you want the most satisfied, content people, it's those in those long-term marriages. But here's the thing. Is this some sort of new concept? Do we need to have had, 80 years of Harvard studies to realize that the meaning of life is love? No.
Well, you know what's funny about it, Don? Is what actually at the time, if you rewind all those years back, you know what they thought would make them happy?
I'm curious. No, what did they think?
The same things that we today think would make us happy. Riches and fame.
Well, and we just talked about Solomon in Ecclesiastes, right? Same deal thousands of years ago. Oh, I tried money. I tried women. I had all the power in the world. I had everything. And I was still not content. I was still not happy.
You still felt like you had nothing.
And I still had nothing. At the end of the day, all we need is love. Is it a shock that all of our songs are about love and all of the great stories, right, in our culture about love.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what that means, though. And that's why it's ultimately pointing to God.
Is it that we don't know what it means, or that we just don't have the worldview anymore to put it in context? Because as Catholics, we know that. At least we should. Yeah, you know what? The meaning of life is love. God is love. He created us out of love, for love. That's the whole point. That's our whole life is about loving God, loving others. Jesus summed up the entire Old Testament by saying, love God, love others.
But I think part of the problem is that we've become so acquainted with a disordered type of love and a disordered type of mercy, where we think it's merciful to, for example, not have this child that a woman's pregnant with because that child's going to grow up with not as much money as I think they should. Or because it's going to be challenging for me to have to balance work and having a child, so I should just not have my child. Like, we make these decisions that we think at times are loving, we think are good.
How is that loving, though? It's
but that's how we make our decisions.
Yeah, I think we've lost the whole understanding of what love is, right? Like, we have a false definition of love. It's my emotions, or it's how I'm feeling about whatever the situation is. In fact, I got an interesting email. I think it was just yesterday. Somebody who was reading my book on evangelization, how to talk to a skeptic. And in the middle of it, it's not a throwaway chapter, but it's a chapter about, well, here's what skeptics are going to need to, have clarified for them. And I have this section on love. And so I don't know if it's surprising, but this has been easily the chapter that I get the most feedback on.
Really?
People read it and they're like, Don, where'd that come from? This was actually this guy's question. It was a very legitimate question. He's like, this is a life-changing chapter. I'm so glad I read, this whole book on evangelization. Oh, whatever, forget that. What I wanted to really focus on was this new understanding of love that you've given me. Where did you get that? He said. Is there a theologian I should go to? And this is, I'm like, well, no. I mean, yes, John Paul II, people like Dietrich or von Hildebrand, people that really I did focus on. But this is just Jesus, right? This is just the Christian understanding of love. But love is an action where you give of yourself for the good of another. Starting there, everything else is going to fall into place, right? And I think if we don't have that clear understanding of what love is, all sorts of crazy things happen, right? Like all sorts of misconceptions.
Justifications, false mercy, stuff. Whatever it is. Well, and I think this is the example where we have to begin. How do we purify what we think is good, what we think is love, with what truly is good and loving? Because I think this is something each and every single one of us. We have our disordered loves, our disordered things that we think are good and will make us happy. How do you, and I think this is a question you need to ask yourself, how do you find what that is? And I think that's where we have to come back to the sacraments. We have to come back to confession and constant reading of Scripture to help us understand, well, here's something I'm struggling with. How can I begin to overcome it and purify, right, this disordered desire or an area in my life that maybe just seems uncomfortable? Maybe there's a reason it's uncomfortable. Maybe we're not taking the right attitude into something. We're just going through the motions of whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe we should stop using the word love. I think, like you talked about disordered love, I get what you're saying, but maybe disordered desire is what you said second. Yes. Maybe that's better, right? Or what are you worshiping? What are you worshiping in your life, ascribing worth to? And only love what is deserving of worship. That might be a helpful clarification, because otherwise, all sorts of weird things. Here's another article. And again, you're listening to Trending with Don and Timmerie. If you're just joining us, you can find out more about us at trendingdt.com. You can find Timmerie at timmerie.com and me at donjohnsonministries.org. Speaking of a false understanding of love, interesting poll. 1 in 4 Americans don't think one-night stands count as cheating. This is a poll this is in the Deseret News, but this is a countrywide poll. So you might say, well, that's, at least 75% of people, think that one-night stands. But I'm like, hold on. 25% of people in the country would not consider it cheating for you to go have a one-night stand, to go sleep with somebody else? I mean, what are we thinking here? But it's more than that. In fact, if you look at the stats, that's the high number, because the rest of the poll tells you stuff like this. Is it okay to send sexually explicit messages to someone other than your partner? Well, that drops it down to 69%. 69% think, well, no, that is cheating.
So only 69% of people think that you shouldn't send sexually explicit messages to someone who's not your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, spouse, whatever. Right. That's not cheating. How about this one? Being emotionally involved with someone besides your partner, that goes down to 55%. Now, what would that mean? Well, maybe you actively maintain an online dating profile. I don't get this one. So you're out there actively maintaining an online dating profile. Actually, that one's at 63%. But then you are emotionally involved with someone, I guess maybe from that site, or you send flirtatious messages to someone other than your partner. That one's 51%. Only half the country thinks that is cheating. And I found this incredibly interesting. Like, really? All of these people are okay with you, someone I'm involved with, maintaining a dating site, sending messages, being Facebook friends on a more, not just friends, but interacting intimate,
with.
Emotional. So if we're talking about emotional, there's a sense of dependency and maybe pleasure that we're receiving on an emotional level from another person.
Yeah. That was interesting to me. Here's, I think the key line, though, is that when these folks asked like, for instance, there's a pastor here talking to potential, he's doing premarital counseling, right? So potentially married people, and asked them what they considered cheating. And it was all about the physical act. That was the thing, right? So, okay, well, what does it mean for your partner to cheat on you? Oh, well, they would have to go and, well, at least kiss or sleep with someone else. The emotional aspect of it didn't play, right? That's not really cheating.
Because sex and physical touch is everything, right? Because that's just the basis of every relationship, right? I mean, that's what should be. So you can do anything with your partner except for have physical interaction.
Yes, exactly. Now, interestingly, men were a little bit worse on this. Like,
not wanting
men
it?
are stupid. Okay, men are physical.
What do you mean?
Well, so men are basically, okay, yes, we can do everything up to the point, except for that 25%, up to the point of sleeping with someone else. Women thought it was a little bit more concerning if the man had an online dating profile and if he maintained emotional connection. And
I'm sorry, I've just got to stop you right there, Don. I just have to say, women, we know and we want better, but we have started to justify and allow for behavior that is so outside of the norm. If you're in a relationship with someone who is actively pursuing or open to another relationship, it is loving to call them out and expect more from them.
Well, you said it, though. Loving. You're right. Of course, you're right, Timmerie. It's loving. But how do we understand love? And we just went through that whole conversation. This is why I brought this article in now. To not understand that love is the self-giving of yourself for the good of another, and that is what produces union with another. It is that giving. It's that combination of intellect, spirit, body, all of that. I'm giving all of that to you, and you give all of that back. And if we don't do that, we don't have love. Well, nobody's starting from that point anymore, right? Well, what is love? Well, sex or something, right? It's the physical thing. We've talked often on the show about how we basically understand ourselves as emotions or intellect with a body. And so what you do with your body, whatever, okay? The body's just there to play with. That's why at least women are better than men. That's why at least women understand that the really concerning thing is if you have an emotional or intellectual connection with someone, That is more, well, in some ways, yes. I mean, right? You're starting to understand.
That's so challenging. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, too, and I can't remember what triggered the conversation, but we were talking about how, that's who it was, Vice President Pence, and how people were criticizing him for saying that he doesn't really drink at events because he's going to a lot of events. And if his wife's not there, he tries not to drink because there are a lot of people around. He's traveling a lot. And also he tries not to have dinner alone with another woman. And for some reason, people were just nailing him. But I guess, and I think you and I both understood this as well, we too travel a lot and we're gone, we're speaking, we're not around our significant other. And we actually meet really neat people who have the same views, sometimes to a perfect extent. They have the same passions, and there's a level where there could be this love with other people based on this deep connection from a evangelization perspective, an emotional perspective. But there's a responsibility of still keeping that barrier of there's a difference between having an intimate, emotional, and physical relationship with someone and having a friendship that has defined boundaries.
Yeah, and the difference is that I'm not going to give of myself entirely to anyone other than my wife. I think that's the key. And, it made me think of the contraceptive mindset, actually. I'm doing a lot of research about this. I've got this documentary I'm trying to make about contraception and its effects on the world. And actually, when I saw this poll where 75%, only 75% think that having sex with somebody else is cheating, but all the way down to less than half of the country is all that concerned if you have an emotional connection with someone else. Doesn't it perhaps start, Timmerie, with the fact that even the person you are in a relationship with, even that significant other, that you and that person are withholding things from each other, that you're not fully gifted to each other. So, for instance, if you're not married, you already are not giving the rest of your life to that person, right? You're withholding.
There's a lack of commitment. There's a lack of fully committing, giving both your body, emotionally, everything to that person.
You're withholding something from them. If you're not married, you're unwilling to say, I'm going to give you tomorrow or next year, right? That's just by its nature, it's a withholding. Fair enough, right? We need to withhold that from almost everyone else in the world, all except for that one person that you're going to marry. But in these relationships, you're always withholding something. And at its root, the contraceptive mindset says, even to people who are married, says, I'm not going to give everything of myself. We're going to withhold a little bit. Or another way to put it is, I'm going to alter myself a little bit. I don't want the real you, the full you. My professor at Franciscan always used to talk about that. In fact, he tells the story about a couple. And the woman came to him distraught, this Catholic lady, and says, my husband wants me to go on the pill or something, use some sort of contraception, or he's going to leave me for another woman. And I can't have that. I can't have my husband leaving me for another woman, so I'm going to use contraception. And so she did. But the point that my professor made was, no, he already got another woman. You changed. He did not want you as you. He wanted a different woman. He wanted a contracepted you. And so you've already changed. You already are a different person. He said, I'm not willing to give myself to you. I want somebody else. And I think that mindset is so common among people. We're just used to, I'm not going to get all of you.
Yes.
I'm satisfied with getting half of you.
And you know what's interesting about this? I'll never forget one of the conversations I had about last year. And it was with a young woman who had come into the crisis pregnancy center. She was getting ready to get married. And and we wanted to talk to her because she had a little bit of a past. We wanted to talk to her about, basically making sure that she understood sexuality and the self-giving of it. Long story short, we end up sitting here talking through what natural family planning is. And I ended up going for the conversation. I said, do you understand, this self-giving, this openness to life and this union between the two? She said, yes, I love that. I said, so we understand how, hormonal contraception could be impactful and harmful to the body, putting the state in a pseudo-pregnancy, the body, that estrogen and the progesterone and synthetic forms are group 1 carcinogens. Also understanding that, it changes the libido and how we interact interact on a sexual level and confuses the brain and the pheromones and all these elements? She said, yes. I said, but could you see that if every time you had sex or at different points in time, you decided you wanted to use a condom, what could you see kind of being problematic about that? She said, well, it kind of reduces it to a base level. I said, exactly. We're reducing our intimate sharing, this gift that is exclusively shared with one person, and we're limiting what we're giving of ourselves and what we're open to in life. This union, we're saying, I just want to have sex with you now out of an element of pleasure. And she said, she said, my sister and her husband, she said, they use contraception. They use condoms all the time. She said, and there's always this lack of commitment between the two of them. She said, and it started when they started using contraception. She said, I saw this kind of taking advantage of the other person, even in just the way they began to talk to one another.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a using of others. You're objectifying that other person. And I know we don't set out to do that, but by its nature, that's what contraception does. All right, before we end today, we have a few shout outs for things that you might want to do during this summer.
So if you have any kids in the teen years, there's a Vox Vitae camp, voxvitae.org. It's a Catholic and pro-life training camp. They have a whole day on Catholic apologetics, pro-life apologetics, abortion, gender ideology, pornography. They're going to work with the kids praying in front of the abortion clinic, different elements of how can we as Christians be active and give of ourselves and who we are, but also be formed in a solid Catholic education here as well. There are two camps. The one's in LA, one is in Orange County this summer. I'm actually emceeing and giving a number of the workshops. I will be with your kids all week long if they do come. So please check out voxvitae.org. Second, I really want to recommend this. It has been, Don, for me, probably some of the most formative elements of my faith. And that is, I want to encourage you to go to eagleeyeministries.org. This is a group that is it's a nonprofit run by the Community of St. John, the French religious order that has a number of houses here in the States. These are some of the most incredible priests and monks you will ever meet who have dedicated Eagle Eye Ministry. They have a series of summer programs throughout the year. They even have a whole month-long formation program called Ecclesia that I've also been to. And they take you through living the monastic lifestyle. They take you through theology, philosophy. I've been out to the Badlands camping. I've been up to Aspen, Colorado, up at this cabin, hiking in. But what happens is you take the sacraments, you take this deep prayer life, and it forms you to be contemplative and faith-based in whatever area of life you're in. So please check out eagleeyeministries.org.
All right. Those both sound fantastic. You've been listening to Trending with Don and Timmerie. Please go to the iTunes podcast and subscribe there and leave a review. We love to hear from you. And you can also contact us at our websites, timmerie.com, donjohnsonministries.org. And thanks for being here, Timmy.
Thank you. Shout out to Andrew, who I met this weekend, who loves the show as well.
All right. Thanks for listening, Andrew. We will see you next time.
This has been Trending with Don and Timmerie on Immaculate Heart Radio. Trending. To learn more about Don Johnson or Timmerie Millington, or to book either of them to speak, visit donjohnsonministries.org or timmerie.com. And be sure to share and rate the podcast of the show on iTunes.